At 8 o'clock in the morning, the terraces are empty. The Mediterranean lies flat below the cliffs of Villefranche-sur-Mer, a sheet of pale metal stretching toward Italy. 17 acres of sculpted gardens descend in deliberate tiercel of trees, cypress lines, clipped hedges, stone balustrades that have not shifted in a century. The façade above them rises in measured symmetry, pale walls, arched windows, tiled roof warmed by the sun long before anyone enters the rooms behind it. There are nearly 50,000 square feet of interior space, dozens of salons, corridors long enough to silence footsteps, windows positioned not simply for light, but for command, each one framing the coastline as if it were private territory. No voices carry across the stone this morning. No flags announce allegiance. No carriage wheels. No engines. Only wine moving along terraces designed to hold processions. The house has outlived emperors. It has outlasted bankers. It has survived occupations, market collapses, revolutions of taste, and fortunes that vanish faster than they were assembled. Its foundations remain fixed while ownership circulates in silence. Villa Leopolda was conceived as a royal assertion, a Mediterranean statement of permanence tied to a crown that believed itself anchored in history. It was meant to embody dynastic continuity, cultivated leisure, imperial reach, stone arranged to suggest that authority could root itself in landscape. Yet the estate did not remain with a dynasty. It did not protect inheritance. Instead, it drifted from sovereign possession to private speculation, from aristocratic retreat to transactional asset. Its name remained, but its meaning shifted with each transfer of wealth. What was built to secure legacy became a trophy of liquidity. The terraces are unchanged. The view remains controlled. The walls still suggest command over sea and sky. But if a palace survives by abandoning its original purpose, if it endures by accepting each new master without resistance, what, precisely, has been preserved. Before terraces were carved into the hillside, before facades were aligned to capture the Mediterranean horizon, the slope above Villefranche-sur-Mer was agricultural land. In the mid-19th century, this stretch of the French Riviera was not yet synonymous with concentrated wealth. It was a working coast lineal of groves, modest villas, fishing boats anchored in quiet coves. The hills were patterned by subsistence rhythms. Stone retaining walls held soil in place for cultivation, not spectacle. The sea was livelihood before it was leisure. The Riviera's transformation had begun, but it was gradual. Northern European aristocrats, drawn by mild winters, started arriving in the 1860s and 1870s. They built winter residences along the coast, structures that were large but seasonal, ornamental but temporary. These were retreats from colder capitals, not permanent seats of authority. The land that would become Villa Leopolda did not immediately distinguish itself from its neighbors. It was elevated? Yes. The view was expansive, but elevation alone did not imply destiny. Many hillsides offered similar panoramas. The region was still in negotiation with its own identity, caught between provincial agriculture and emerging cosmopolitan resort. At the same time, far from the Riviera, Belgium was redefining its scale of ambition. In 1865, King Leopold II ascended the Belgian throne. Belgium itself was a young constitutional monarchy, established only in 1830. Its territory was compact, its influence limited compared to older European empires. Leopold II inherited a crown constrained by parliamentary power and geographic modesty. He was not content with modesty. Leopold's early reign was marked less by ceremony than by frustration. Belgium possessed industrial capacity, coal, steel, textiles, but lacked overseas territories. While Britain and France projected dominance across continents, Belgium remained peripheral in imperial competition. Leopold understood the symbolic weight of architecture. In Brussels and Ostend, he sponsored grand boulevards, monuments, architectonic manifestations of ambition that stretched the visual scale of his kingdom beyond its borders. He invested heavily in urban projects that suggested imperial stature, even when territorial reach had yet to materialize. Architecture, for Leopold, was not merely aesthetic, it was compensatory. In the 1880s, his ambitions extended decisively into Central Africa, culminating in the establishment of the Congo Free State under his personal control. Wealth began flowing back to Belgium. Rubber, ivory, minerals. The human cost would later stain that enterprise permanently. At the time, however, the profits allowed Leopold to pursue a broader project, the amplification of presence. Presence required landscape. The French Riviera, increasingly fashionable among European elites, offered a stage detached from Belgian political constraints. Here, sovereignty could be expressed not through governance, but through possession. A monarch could acquire land not as ruler of France, but as private owner, extending influence quietly across borders. Yet when Leopold first acquired property near Villefranche in the early 20th century, the site did not immediately assume monumental form. It was a collection of parcels, gardens, modest structures adapted and expanded over time. The house that would later be called Villa Leopolda did not emerge fully formed from royal command. It evolved through acquisition and accumulation. At the turn of the century, the Riviera's social calendar thickened. Russian nobility, British aristocrats, and European financiers established seasonal residences along the coast. Villas multiplied, each one a declaration of cultivated exile. But even within this environment of display, not every estate achieved permanence. Many were demolished, remodeled beyond recognition, or abandoned after a single generation. The land above Villefranche remained one among many elevated retreats. Its early structures were functional, comfortable, but not yet monumental. Gardens were present, but not yet sculpted into the dramatic terraces that now cascade toward the sea. The estate's identity was still fluid. It had not yet crystallized into a singular architectural statement. Leopold's attention, meanwhile, was divided. His African enterprise demanded oversight. Political scrutiny in Europe intensified as reports of exploitation in the Congo reached international audiences. By 1908, under mounting pressure, Leopold was compelled to transfer control of the Congo Free State to the Belgian government. This shift altered the financial and moral landscape of his reign. The Riviera property did not command headlines. It did not symbolize national triumph. It was peripheral to the central controversies that defined Leopold's later years. In fact, during his lifetime, the estate was less a finished masterpiece than a project in mode on a personal retreat, shaped by intermittent investment. When Leopold II died in 1909, the property did not pass into stable dynastic use. His relationship with the Belgian establishment had grown strained. Public opinion was complex, divided between acknowledgement of infrastructural achievements and condemnation of colonial abuses. The Riviera estate, detached from Belgian soil, lacked the emotional anchoring of national monuments. It became, instead, an asset. In the years that followed, Europe itself entered a period of instability. The First World War reconfigured borders, economies, and aristocratic fortunes. The Riviera, though geographically distant from trench warfare, felt the consequences through disrupted travel, altered wealth flows, and shifting political alliances. Many aristocratic estates across Europe struggled with maintenance costs. Staff reductions became common. Gardens were simplified. Entire wings of large houses were shuttered to conserve resources. The hillside above Villefranche did not yet stand apart from this pattern. The villa changed hands. Its scale remained significant, but not unrivaled. Wealthy industrialists and financiers began replacing traditional aristocracy as the dominant class capable of sustaining such properties. Ownership increasingly reflected liquidity rather than lineage. What would later be described as Villa Leopolda's grandeur was not yet fixed. The estate was substantial, but not mythic. It was one among several Riviera properties cycling through Europe's upper tiers. No single observer in the 1910s or 1920s could have predicted that this particular hillside would become synonymous with speculation, with record-breaking valuations, with headlines describing billions. At this stage, it was land shaped by incremental ambition, expended, renovated, transferred. Its future importance depended less on destiny than on timing. The Riviera was accelerating toward modern celebrity, cinema, new industrial wealth, and transatlantic capital began altering the profile of its residents. The coastline gradually shifted from aristocratic winter refuge to global stage for visible wealth. The estate above Villefranche was positioned to absorb that shift, but in its earliest decades, it was still negotiating its identity, part agricultural past, part royal experiment, part financial holding. Its terraces were not yet theatrical. Its name was not yet shorthand for excess. It existed in transition, waiting for an owner who would consolidate its fragments into a singular architectural argument. For now, it was a promising hillside overlooking a calm so valuable, elevated, but not yet inevitable. The transformation began not with decoration, but with excavation. To convert a hillside into a palace requires subtraction before addition. Soil must be cut away. Stone must be retained. Gravity must be negotiated. At Villefranche-sur-Mer, the slope descending toward the Mediterranean was carved into a sequence of terraces so deliberate that they appear inevitable. They are not. By the early 20th century, the estate that would solidify as Leopolda began to assume architectural coherence. Successive owners expanded and reconfigured the existing structures, but it was in the interwar period under industrial and financial wealth rather than royal lineage the house acquired the scale and clarity it now presents. The main residence ultimately extended to nearly 50,000 square feet. To comprehend that size requires comparison. It is larger than many European municipal buildings. Its interior volume exceeds that of numerous small urban apartment blocks, yet it functions as a single private dwelling. The façade does not shout. It does not resemble a fortified chateau or an exuberant palace. Instead, it adopts a restrained Mediterranean classicismetry, pale stucco, tiled rooflines that reflect heat rather than defy it. The power lies not in ornament, but in control. Control of sight lines. From the upper lodges, the Mediterranean appears curated. The curvature of the coastline can be surveyed in a single glance. The Vio's placement asserts quiet command over the harbor below. Ships entering Villefranche seem reduced in scale, their movements observable from above like pieces on a maritime board. The gardens required even greater ambition than the house. 17 acres of landscape grounds descend in formal progression. To maintain them demands constant labor, pruning, irrigation, stabilization of stone retaining walls. The gardens are not decorative afterthoughts. They are structural extensions of the architecture. Without them, the house would stand abruptly on a slope. With them, it cascades toward the sea in controlled stages. Olive trees some centuries old were preserved and integrated into geometric design. Cypress lines emphasize verticality against horizontal terraces. Pathways are arranged to guide movement slowly downward, elongating the experience of descent. Water features punctuate intervals, cooling air and signaling cultivated abundance. The scale is calibrated for precision. The driveway curves deliberately, delaying the first full view of the façade. Arrival is choreographed. Guests do not approach abruptly, they ascend gradually, the sea revealing itself in fragments before opening completely behind the house. Interior rooms are arranged in enfilade on a salon aligned with the next, doors positioned so that when open, perspective extends across multiple chambers. This alignment creates visual depth and reinforces hierarchy. Movement through the house is directional. One proceeds inward, then outward toward terraces, always aware of axial lines. Numbers begin to accumulate. Dozens of bedrooms, multiple kitchens to service staff and formal dining separately, reception rooms large enough to host gatherings that blur the boundary between private residence and semi-public stage. Ceiling heights calibrated to temper Mediterranean heat while preserving proportion. Maintenance costs remain extraordinary. Even in early 20th century currency, sustaining such a property required resources comparable to operating a small enterprise. Staff included gardeners, cooks, housekeepers, drivers, security, and administrative overseers. The villa was not simply a home, it was an institution requiring management. Each architectural decision reinforced a message, permanence through scale. The house was not built for mobility. It was built to anchor wealth physically in land overlooking one of Europe's most coveted coastlines. Its terraces imply patience. Its stone suggests endurance. Even the muted palette communicates confidence and no need for flamboyant color when position itself is sufficient. The symbolic logic was clear. To possess such elevation above the Mediterranean was to demonstrate distance from volatility below. Markets fluctuate. Regimes change. But a hillside carved into geometry appears resistant. Yet the ambition embedded in the architecture was not purely aesthetic. It was ideological. To construct at this scale on the Riviera during the interwar period signaled integration into a transnational elite. The estate functioned as a node in a network of wealth stretching from Paris to London to New York. Ownership conferred not just privacy, but visibility within certain circles. The Villa's gardens became venues for controlled display luncheons, evening receptions, diplomatic conversations conducted in air perfumed by citrus and salt. The architecture framed social interactions, reminding participants of the stability implied by stone terraces and Mediterranean light. And yet, beneath this stability lay fragility. The interwar years were economically volatile. Fortunes built during industrial expansion faced disruption during the Great Depression. Maintaining an estate of this magnitude during global financial contraction require either extraordinary liquidity or willingness to absorb loss. Villa Leopolda embodied a paradox even in its physical form. It projected timelessness, but depended on contemporary capital flows. Its terraces suggested rootedness, but its ownership reflected mobility of money across borders. The villa was both monument and asset. As ownership passed from one wealthy individual to another industrious, financiers, Magnetist's architectural program remained largely intact. Renovations occurred. Interiors were modernized, gardens adjusted to evolving tastes, but the fundamental structure endured. The house absorbed each new vision without altering its external argument. This adaptability became its defining feature. Unlike palaces tied explicitly to state functions, Villa Leopolda operated in the private sphere. It was insulated from nationalization, from public ceremony, from constitutional obligation. Its meaning derived from possession rather than governance. The Mediterranean view remained constant. From the highest terrace, the sea appears borderless. Yet the villa itself exists because borders once mattered intensely: imperial boundaries, financial jurisdictions, property law. The architecture materializes the privileges afforded by those systems. To stand in the central salon and look outward is to experience a compression of scales, intimate furnishings within a room large enough to echo. Beyond the windows, terraces stepping toward an expanse of water that connects continents. Ambition, here, was translated into perspective. The villa did not attempt to rival Versailles or Buckingham Palace. It chose instead to dominate its immediate environment so completely that comparison became unnecessary. Its authority was localized but absolute within its boundaries. The stone holds temperature. The terraces hold shape. The olive trees continue producing fruit whether guests arrive or not. By the time the estate reached its mature form, it had shed any ambiguity about its intention. It was no longer a promising hillside. It was a constructed argument about endurance. But endurance in architecture does not guarantee continuity of purpose. The walls had been aligned to frame one era's vision of power. The question remained whether that vision could survive the century accelerating beyond its terraces. The villa's mornings began before its owners woke. Gardeners moved across the terraces at first light, inspecting irrigation lines that ran invisibly beneath gravel paths. Stone steps were washed down. Fallen leaves were removed before the sun rose high enough to expose disorder. Inside, shutters were opened in sequence, allowing air to circulate through aligned salons. The house was prepared daily as if for an event, even when none was scheduled. Life within Villa Leopolda followed choreography dictated by architecture. Bedrooms were positioned to capture either sunrise over the sea or late afternoon light across the gardens. Guests assigned to particular wings understood their placement as subtle hierarchy. Proximity to the central salon signaled favor. Distance implied privacy or exclusion. Staff circulation routes were carefully separated from principal rooms. Secondary corridors allowed movement without intrusion. Service staircases preserved the illusion that meals appeared effortlessly on long dining tables set with Mediterranean views behind them. The villa did not merely contain social life, it structured it. During its years under prominent industrial and financial owners in the 20th century, the estate functioned as a controlled theater. Luncheons extended across terraces where conversation competed with cicadas. Evenings gathered in salons designed for symmetried chairs arranged to direct attention toward the center, windows framing twilight beyond. In the interwar years and beyond, the Riviera attracted a convergence of aristocrats displaced by political upheaval, American financiers expanding their European presence, and cultural figures drawn by climate and proximity. Villa Leopolda, by virtue of its scale and privacy, could host them without surrendering control. Yet the house imposed its own discipline. Its size demanded occupancy. Empty rooms created an acoustic reminder of absence. Footsteps echoed disproportionately. Owners often traveled with entourages not solely for companionship, but to animate the architecture. A residence of this magnitude resisted solitude. The terraces, designed for procession, encouraged movement in pairs or groups. To descend alone through 17 acres of formal gardens underscored scale rather than intimacy. The environment favored spectacle over introspection. During the mid-20th century, as Europe recovered from war and global capital began shifting patterns, Villa Leopolda entered the orbit of new wealth. Banking families and industrial magnates viewed Riviera estates as both refuge and statement. The villa's previous royal associations lent it symbolic gravitas, even as ownership detached entirely from monarchy. Inside, routines adapted to modern expectations supported kitchens, refined security measures, discrete communications infrastructure, yet the structural logic remained unchanged. Large salons still required large gatherings. Expansive terraces still implied visibility. Relationships within the villa often reflected its proportions. Marriages conducted under its roof unfolded within rooms too grand for ordinary domestic disagreement. Disputes resonated differently when framed by marble floors and ceilings several meters high. Privacy was paradoxical. One could retreat to distant wings, yet complete isolation within such a vast property risked signaling division. The villa encouraged performance. Formal dinners were staged with Mediterranean twilight as backdrop. Guests were guided along terraces as if participating in ritual procession. The architecture shaped conversation to depicts investment, politics, art subjects suited to rooms built for projection rather than intimacy. Children raised temporarily within its walls encountered a geography unlike typical domestic space. Corridors extended beyond immediate supervision. Gardens became landscapes of exploration, but also of distance. Parental presence could be physically remote even while technically nearby. Staff lived by rhythm dictated by the building's demands. Maintenance was constant. Stone required cleaning. Gardens required pruning. Interiors required climate control. The house was not static. It was an organism requiring continuous attention. As decades progressed, the villa experienced ownership changes, reflecting broader economic transformations. The late 20th century introduced new categories of wealth: globalized, mobile, often detached from specific national identity. Acquisition of estates like Villa Leopolda signaled entry into a lineage of visible possession. Yet the building remained indifferent to biography. Owners arrived with reputations: bankers, industrialists, investors, each projecting intent onto the same façade. Some viewed the villa as retreat, others as investment, others as legacy for heirs. The architecture accommodated each motive without adjustment. During periods of economic expansion, gatherings multiplied. Helicopters occasionally punctuated the sky above the terraces. Media attention intensified around reported valuations that climbed into hundreds of millions of euros. The villa became shorthand in financial journalism for extreme property worth. Inside, however, daily life retained older rhythms. Meals were prepared in kitchens insulated from the spectacle outside. Windows were open to release heat trapped beneath tiled roofs. Security teams patrolled perimeters invisibly, ensuring that exclusivity remained intact. The villa's influence on behavior was subtle but persistent. It rewarded grandeur. It diminished modesty. Its scale suggested permanence even when ownership contracts proved temporary. In moments of quiet early morning before staff movement, late evening after guests departed, the house seemed to exhale. Long corridors absorbed fading footsteps. Sea air drifted through open windows, carrying salt that would slowly weather exterior stone. These intervals revealed a tension. The architecture was designed to project control, yet it required continuous adaptation to shifting financial and political climates. Owners might command global portfolios, but within these walls they were subject to maintenance schedules, to the cost of irrigation, to regional regulations governing heritage properties. The villa shaped not only social rituals but financial decisions. Upkeep expenses necessitated liquidity. Renovations required negotiation with preservation authorities. The estate demanded justification beyond sentiment. Over time, the meaning of residence shifted. For some owners, Villa Leopolda became less primary home and more emblem a Mediterranean anchor in diversified holdings. Periods of occupancy shortened. Seasons of vacancy lengthened. Rooms remained furnished but unused. The building did not protest. It retained proportion, symmetry, orientation toward the sea. It continued framing sunsets with precision, yet as life within its walls grew intermittent, the villa's role began subtly transforming from lived environment to stored value. The terraces still hosted gatherings. The salon still received guests. But beneath the continuity of routine, a quiet redefinition was underway. The estate had once been an assertion of rooted presence. It was gradually becoming transferable capital wrapped in stone. The breaking point would not arrive as architectural collapse. It would come through forces external to the terraced: legal, financial, geopolitical, leshing what ownership itself meant in a globalized century. The turning point did not arrive with visible damage to the façade. There were no shattered windows, no burned terraces, no military occupation. The stone remained intact. The gardens continued descending in ordered geometry toward the sea. Yet by the early 21st century, the logic sustaining Villa Leopolda shifted in a way that could not be reversed. The fracture was financial. In 2008, as global markets convulsed under the weight of collapsing credit structures, the estate became entangled in one of the most publicized real estate disputes in Europe. A Russian billionaire agreed to purchase the villa for a reported sum approaching €500 million, figures that, at the time, positioned the property among the most expensive residential transactions ever recorded. The number itself became a spectacle. It circulated in headlines detached from the architecture it described. The terraces, the olive trees, the restrained Mediterranean façade were reduced to a valuation that functioned as shorthand for extreme wealth. The villa's identity compressed into a price. Then the beer withdrew. As financial markets deteriorated in late 2008, liquidity tightened globally. The prospective purchaser sought to reclaim a deposit reportedly amounting to tens of millions of euros. What followed was not negotiation in private salons, but litigation in French courts. Contracts were examined. Intent was scrutinized. The estate, once conceived as royal retreat, became subject of public legal argument. Court proceedings focused not on gardens or architecture, but on obligations and penalties. Judges ruled that the deposit would not be returned. The seller retained it. The villa remained unsold. The event marked more than a failed transaction. It exposed the estate's transformation from symbol of dynastic continuity to instrument of speculative capital. The dispute unfolded during a global financial crisis that revealed vulnerabilities in systems underpinning modern wealth. Assets once assumed secure were suddenly unstable. Markets once assumed rational became volatile. Villa Leopolda did not lose structural integrity. It lost innocence. Its valuation had climbed not because of expanded terraces or new architectural innovation, but because of intensified competition among global elites for visible holdings. The house became a benchmark in financial reporting's, price cited as evidence of excess or resilience depending on perspective. Ownership during this period reflected broader geopolitical shifts. Post-Soviet fortunes, Middle Eastern capital, European banking dynasty intersected along the Riviera. The villa existed at the crossroads of transnational wealth flows that were themselves subject to sanction regimes, regulatory scrutiny, and fluctuating currency values. The global financial crisis of 20,082,009 introduced a reality from which there was no return. Elite estates were no longer insulated from systemic shocks. Even properties embedded in centuries-old landscapes could be drawn into liquidity crises and legal battles. The assumption that physical grandeur guaranteed financial stability proved untenable. Within the villa's walls, daily routines continued. Staff maintained gardens. Security systems operated. Yet the meaning of ownership had shifted. To possess Villa Leopolda now required not only capital, but resilience against public examination. Real estate transactions at this scale invited scrutiny from regulators, journalists, and political observers. The estate's very prominence ensured that anonymity, a traditional privilege of private wealth, became harder to sustain. The breaking point, therefore, was conceptual. Originally constructed to suggest permanence and sovereign continuity, the villa now functioned as a high-visibility asset within volatile global markets. Its terraces framed a sea that connected continents, but those same connections amplified exposure to international turbulence. The legal dispute of 2008 was resolved in contractual terms. Deposits were retained, ownership stabilized, but something irreversible had occurred. The villa's identity was no longer primarily architectural or historical. It had been reclassified in public imagination as a unit of extreme valuation, a figure cited in economic analysis, a headline in financial journalism. Stone had been translated into abstraction. From that moment forward, Villa Leopolda could not fully return to its earlier narrative as royal remnant or cultivated retreat. It had entered the realm of symbolic capital at a global scale. The terraces still descended in orderly fashion. The Mediterranean still reflected morning light. Yet the estate now existed within a network of financial instruments, regulatory frameworks, and geopolitical calculations that dwarfed its original conception. Its original vision and assertion of rooted dynastic presence overlooking a stable sea could not survive intact in an era when ownership itself was mobile, litigated, and publicly quantified. The villa endured, but permanence had become performance. After the litigation subsided, Villa Leopolda did not fragment. It did not fall into neglect. There was no boarded façade, no overgrown terrace collapsing into the hillside. Instead, it stabilized. Ownership consolidated under private wealth with sufficient depth to absorb both maintenance costs and reputational visibility. The villa continued to operate gardens trimmed, stone cleaned, interiors climate controlled, yet its function had subtly transformed. It was no longer primarily a residence in the traditional sense, where earlier owners had embedded themselves seasonally within its walls, hosting extended stays. Structuring social calendars around its terrace. Later stewardship treated the estate as strategic holding. Occupancy became intermittent. Presence became selective. The architecture did not change, but its rhythm did. A house of nearly 50,000 square feet resists dormancy. Systems must run to prevent deterioration. Humidity regulated. Shutters opened and closed to manage light. Irrigation timed precisely to sustain Mediterranean vegetation without oversaturation. The villa demanded constant technical attention even when its principal rooms stood unoccupied. The staff structure adapted accordingly. Fewer full-time domestic figures, more specialized maintenance and security oversight. Surveillance technologies integrated discreetly into stone boundaries. The property functioned less as an inhabited domestic environment and more as preserved asset. This mutation was not visible from the road. The façade remained composed. The terraces continued their measured descent. Olive trees, some older than the villa itself, produced fruit on schedule. Visitors viewing the estate from the harbor would observe no decline. Yet the internal logic had shifted. Originally, the estate's scale justified itself through live ceremony dinners, receptions, seasonal residents. Now its scale justified itself through rarity. Comparable properties along the Riviera were limited in size, location, and privacy. Villa Leopolda's value lay in its irreplaceability. Irreplaceability is a financial category. The villa survived not because its founding vision endured, but because scarcity intensified. As urban development tightened along the Mediterranean coastline, opportunities to assemble 17 contiguous acres overlooking Villefranche diminished. Regulatory constraints prevented similar constructions at comparable scale. Thus, the estate's survival depended less on narrative continuity and more on legal and geographic constraints. It became, in effect, a protected anomaly. Ownership in the 21st century required negotiation with heritage authorities, environmental regulations, and international financial compliance. Renovations were possible, but incremental. Structural transformation would attract scrutiny. The villa's exterior identity stabilized not through reverence for origin, but through bureaucratic limitation. Inside, contemporary comforts integrated invisibly, updated electrical systems, reinforced climate control, discrete communication networks. The architecture absorbed modernization without altering its Mediterranean composure. The gardens, however, remain labor-intensive. 17 acres of terraces cannot be digitized. They require pruning by hand, stone restoration by artisans familiar with traditional masonry techniques, irrigation calibrated to shifting climate patterns. The estate's physical endurance depended on continuous human effort. In this sense, the villa both betrayed and honored its original purpose. It betrayed dynastic continuity. The Belgian Crowns Association exists now primarily in name. No royal lineage occupies its rooms. The connection to Leopold II functions as historical footnote rather than active inheritance. Yet it honored the deeper architectural ambition to endure. While regimes shifted and markets fluctuated, the villa remained anchored to its hillside. It adapted ownership without altering orientation. It accepted new capital flows without modifying terraces. Its mutation was conceptual rather than structural. The estate no longer claimed to embody sovereign authority. It signified extreme privacy within global networks. It functioned as spatial insurance, a physical counterbalance to intangible portfolios of stocks, bonds, and digital assets. In times of volatility, stone carries psychological weight. To stand on the upper terrace and observe the Mediterranean stretching unbroken to the horizon provides an illusion of stability that fluctuating screens cannot. The villa's architecture offers sensory reassurance at a parade of stone underfoot, scent of olive leaves, wind against balustrades. This sensory constancy became part of its contemporary appeal. Yet the cost of such constancy is distance. As the estate's market valuation escalated into the hundreds of millions of euros, it detached further from local social fabric. It no longer functioned as active participant in Riviera cultural life. Its scale and security rendered it insular. The house became less a node in social networks and more a self-contained enclave. From certain vantage points along the coast, the villa appears timeless. But within its walls, occupancy patterns reflect a world defined by mobility. Owners may arrive by private aircraft, stay briefly, depart for other global residences. The villa serves as Mediterranean anchor in a dispersed portfolio of properties across continents. This is survival through abstraction. The estate persists because it has become symbol detached from singular biography. It is invoked in conversations about wealth concentration, in rankings of most expensive homes, in legal case studies about deposits and contracts. Its terraces, originally carved to suggest rooted dynastic presence, now support a structure whose primary continuity lies in adaptability. The building has not declined in material condition. It has declined in narrative coherence. There is no longer a unified story linking its origin to its current use. Instead, there are layers: royal acquisition, industrial expansion, post-war wealth consolidation, speculative litigation, globalized asset management. The architecture absorbs each layer without visible strain. Yet beneath the stability of stone lies a quiet dislocation. The villa was once intended to project permanence tied to lineage. Today, its permanence is tied to liquidity and legal frameworks. Its survival depends not on family continuity, but on enforceable contracts and capital resilience. It endures, but what it endures as has changed. Late afternoon settles slowly across the terraces. Light moves downward in stages, touching the upper balustrades first, then the olive branches, then the lowest retaining walls near the road. The Mediterranean shifts from silver to muted blue. Shadows lengthen across gravel paths designed for procession. No voices carry through the salons. Doors remain closed to preserve interior climate. Furniture stands in careful arrangement, chairs aligned, tables centered beneath high ceilings. Curtains hang without motion. The house is prepared, as always, for arrival. The stone has absorbed more than a century of seasons. Rain has traced faint patterns along exterior walls. Salt air has softened edges almost imperceptibly, yet the proportions remain exact. The façade continues to frame the horizon with deliberate symmetry. The Belgian king who first attached his name to this hillside is absent. The industrialists, bankers, and magnates who followed have also receded. Their contracts expired. Their fortunes shifted. Their biographies concluded. The terraces remain. 17 acres of cultivated descent still hold their geometry against gravity. Olive trees continue producing fruit indifferent to ownership records. The view over Villefranche-sur-Mer remains unobstructed, as it was before the first stone was laid. From the upper loggia, the sea appears unchanged. Ships cross the horizon, unaware of the valuations once assigned to the land above them. Villa Leopolda does not announce its history. It does not display plaques explaining transitions of power. It stands composed, insulated, and largely silent. It has survived by accepting new masters without resisting reinterpretation. But as evening settles into its empty corridors and the terraces cool beneath fading light, one uncertainty lingers within the stone. When architecture outlives every intention placed upon it, what history is preserved and what has already been quietly replaced?